everybody. Welcome into this emergency edition of Hail Yes, a Detroit Free Press podcast about University of Michigan athletics. I'm Tony Garcia, Michigan football writer for the Free Press, joined by our usual host, our producer, Andrew Burkle, whose microphone is working off and on today. We will get him in when we can, but we just don't want to risk it too much. Andrew, let the people know that you're okay.
I'm here. I'm out in the wilderness hanging out with my grandpa who just got back from the hospital a little bit ago, and just chilling today was the plan. And then this all blew up. So no mic on site. So we'll do what we can.
Right. Well, we did know Thursday that this was going to blow up Friday, but it has certainly blown up in a major way, and kind of difficult to be prepared for everything that was coming down today, especially as an editor. Andrew's been putting out our fires all day. All right. So we are going to try to keep this relatively brief, and the goal of this episode is to lay out the NCAA's findings, what the ruling was, what Michigan's punishments will be, and just sort of interpret our reaction a little bit to it all. But of course, it should be noted, it's 4:30 p.m. Friday, August 15th. About 15 minutes ago, as we were planning this podcast, we got some emails from the university saying essentially, just when you thought it was over, it's not over. The university is going to appeal this decision by the NCAA's Committee on Investigation. So here's the statement from U of M. We appreciate the work of the Committee on Infractions, but respectfully, in a number of instances, the decision makes fundamental errors in interpreting NCAA bylaws, and it includes a number of conclusions that are directly contrary to the evidence or lack of evidence in the record. We will appeal this decision to ensure a fair result, and we will consider all other options. Ward Manuel, the athletic director, and Coach Jerome Moore both released statements as well. But it's essentially saying the same thing, supporting each other, supporting the university, supporting the team. This is why we're moving in this direction. All right. But as we stand, and here's the good news, and I'm using my sarcastic tone when I say that, an appeals process could take up to 8 months. So not great, but let's just operate in the here and now, because we did get the review from the committee, which had all of the evidence that was laid out in, I believe, 74 pages after a review and an investigation and a committee on infractions hearing that took up the better part of the last 2 years. So here are the findings, or the punishment, I should say. Michigan will be on probation for 4 years. There have been show causes given to Jim Harbaugh, 10 years, Connor Stalions, 8 years, Denard Robinson, 3 years, and Sharon Moore, 2 years. These essentially mean that it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for them to get back into college football. And for Sharon, what it means is if he is to leave in the next 2 years and go to another school, he's going to have to write a letter of some sort to the NCAA to explain why this punishment should not follow him to that school. Additionally, Sharon has been suspended for one more game. It was originally 2 games as imposed by the university, weeks 3 and 4 of this season. That's now also going to be the opening week of the 2026 season, which, believe it or not, is scheduled to be played in Germany. So that's quite the trip that he may miss. The fines, which are probably in some ways yes, in some ways no, the most notable part of this, they will be in the realm of tens of millions of dollars, perhaps upwards of 20. Some are reporting 30. We don't have the exact figures. So tens of millions of dollars is a safe way to say that. And then there will also be recruiting sanctions, a 25% reduction on visitors for this year. And then over the 4 years of the probation, they will have to accumulate 14 weeks of no contact with recruits during periods where they would normally be allowed to speak with them. So those are the punishments. The overall takeaway, if we're starting with the good news, Michigan football is still the 2023 national champion. They went 40-3 in those seasons. None of that is being taken away. Perhaps equally as good of news for Michigan is there's no postseason ban moving forward. The NCAA said it did not want to punish athletes or coaches who are not involved during that time. It did say, for the record, the NCAA says there were sufficient grounds for a multi-year postseason ban. This is from a combination of the previous investigation around recruiting, this investigation, the sign stealing, and throughout it all, Michigan's pattern of non-compliance to the process. But again, they said they did not want to punish those who were not around during that time. So the long and the short of this is Michigan got off, even if they are appealing. I'm a little surprised they're appealing, given that there were no major punishments. And so I thought they got off in a pretty good standing. And that seems to be the consensus. Whether you are a Michigan fan or not a Michigan fan, I don't think anybody thinks Michigan got the quote unquote hammer that Rivals fans were hoping for. Let's get Andrew in here.
Yeah, and it seems like that's what everyone And rightfully so, and this was our takeaway right away, was the sufficient evidence to, do a multi-year postseason ban. But that's it right there. That's the nuts and bolts of the entire review, whatever you want to call it. That's what everyone's latching on to. And that's the story there, right? There was enough evidence, but they decided to go in a different direction and hand them with, as we described it in our story, a laundry list of different punishments that they could come up with, most of which seem to be stuff they can overcome. But Michigan at the end of the day decided it was still going to be worth it. And, with the NCAA to appeal that is, but with the NCAA's history, the last half decade or so in court, you can see why they want to try it, because there may be almost no downside. They may be able to just win because the NCAA has been horrible in court lately as far as their record.
Yeah, just about over in that regard. And so, you could argue if it's worth it to keep it in the news cycle versus if you think you're going to get a better result. And my guess, we haven't spoken to anyone around this yet, this is all just happening right now, is they might be trying to get Sharon Moore not suspended for that 2026 game because of how long this process will play out, and maybe reduce the probation. Who knows? Who knows what their rationale is? But let's go through a few of the highlights from this report that, if we are all looking objectively, Andrew said it best. They had evidence to ban Michigan from the postseason. That means, in so many words, you are guilty of what was alleged to have been done, right? Which is this sign-stealing Marine Connor Stallions and his recruit of accomplices, or as he called them, the KGB. That is a nod to the former Russian State Security and Intelligence Agency it was actually the USSR at the time, started in the 50s and went into the early 90s. And he said that they were conducting, quote, counterintelligence. That was sort of what this was about. Today, we had a hearing, or a press conference, I guess you could say, a conference call with the case chief, hearing officer of the Committee on Infractions, Norman Bay. And what he sort of said from their vantage is, quote, you don't put together a network of individuals called the KGB that records, quote unquote, dirty film where the cost is in the tens of thousands of dollars unless you intend to gain a substantial competitive advantage. And that was what the NCAA found, that Michigan was intending to gain a substantial competitive advantage through this scheme. And another quote they had is, regardless of whether it was Stallions or someone acting on his behalf, their physical presence at the game essentially gave them front row seats to a key element of opponents' offensive and defensive strategies. Now, we will never know. How can one quantify the advantage that was gained? And that's sort of been one of the talking points this whole time. You don't know if there was materially gained or not. But the NCAA's point is, even if you can't measure it, it was attempted. That was sort of the reason why this happened. And another thing that we will never know is we don't know what Jim Harbaugh knew, because Jim Harbaugh, who is said to have no knowledge of this scheme while it was going on, during this conference call, a fellow Michigan beat writer asked about if Jim Harbaugh had any idea about what was going on during this. And while the short answer was no, there was no proof that Harbaugh knew, I think the longer answer is the full quote. And so here's what Bay said. One of the problems here is that Coach Harbaugh never turned over any emails or text messages and then refused to be interviewed by the NCAA enforcement staff. So the record is incomplete. So meaning there is no way to know what Jim Harbaugh knew. Everything was, the NCAA was never able to acquire sort of his records or his side of things. Now, what about Connor Stallion's records, you ask? Well, those are 10 feet, 20 feet deep. In a recorded phone call that the NCAA had of Connor Stallion speaking to someone who was referred to as Player One, Connor Stallion said he broke his phone into, quote, 1,000 pieces, and his hard drive of his computer that had any evidence of it was also at the bottom of a pond. So it was all disposed of. There was no way to retrieve any of that to find out exactly what there was or was not. And this was just sort of par for the course for Michigan's compliance, or I should say lack thereof, during this process, because Harbaugh, Stallions, Moore, and Robinson were all found to not cooperate with investigators at some point or another during this investigation. But the destroying of the evidence was probably the primary source of this. And the NCAA said that as far as Stallions goes, his lack of cooperation was, quote, some of the worst the Committee on Investigation has ever seen. A few other notes. There was evidence that Stallion spent $35,000 on tickets alone in just the season 2022. His salary for that year, as I recall, was somewhere between 50 and 60. I believe it was 55, but I'm going to just put it in that ballpark, $50,000 to $60,000. I think that's gross. I don't think that's net. So $35,000 would be just about every single penny that you bring home, unless someone was funding it. Now, the NCAA was not able to corroborate if anybody was funding it. There were some implications from Stallings' circle that there was a outside source, but the famous Uncle T that people have alluded to, there is no evidence that this booster was the guy who was doing this. Again, that does not necessarily mean it did not happen. That means that there was no proof of it. So you can't be charged for something where there's no proof. And just in keeping with the tone of lack of compliance, it's not just with the NCAA that Jim Harbaugh did this. It was also evidently part of the investigation with Michigan's own compliance office. Here's a little line from a story earlier. Harbaugh and what was said on the NCAA conference call this afternoon. Harbaugh had a contentious relationship for the university's own compliance office and led coaches and staff to disregard the NCAA rules. After gathering statements and conducting interviews, the NCAA found the monitoring efforts of the chief compliance officer and her staff were not welcomed by the football program. That was a direct quote. And then also quoting Harbaugh, they said that Harbaugh referenced Michigan's compliance as a thorn in his side, a roadblock, and described them as, quote, scum of the earth. So these are all the findings that came out from this report. And I've tried to do it as quickly as I could, but still lay it all out there. And it's beauty is in the eye of the beholder for the most ardent Michigan fans. And I would argue for thousands, perhaps millions of fans across the country. If you could do this and the end result is getting a national championship, sign me up. That's what tons of people would be saying. I mean, there's just not a ton of punishment. What your school in the future is maybe, I mean, Michigan has one of the largest endowments. I believe their endowment is $19 billion with a B dollars. 20 million is not even a drop in the bucket for you, me, or Steve Smitherin down the road. It's like a $20 bill. It is just nothing. And so you can ask if the punishment fits the crime, and that's really not for, I mean, I guess that's up for everybody to have discussions around the water cooler and at the bar, but this is what the NCAA has done. And I think as far as how I view it, it's not terribly surprising that this is the way things ended up. The NCAA has started a new, but it's an active precedent that they don't want to punish people in the future for transgressions of the past. Now, I guess that one could ask, how can anyone ever be punished for cheating? Because that is what Michigan was found to have done. They broke the rules. They broke the NCAA bylaws. So they cheated. So how could you ever hold them accountable? The other way to do so is to vacate past records. But the NCAA said that was not on the table this time because that is only on the table when ineligible players participate. That's not what happens here. And so if nobody ineligible participated and you can't punish anybody in the past and you don't want to punish anybody in the future who is not involved, which I think on its face, I think that's a fair thought or desire to try to do. This is where you're left. Recruiting sanctions, monetary sanctions, suspensions, show causes, but nothing that vastly alter the landscape of the program. And so I'm going to throw it back to Andrew. I wish I had some water down here. That was far too much of me speaking in a row.
Well, Tony, you definitely can talk for a long, extended period of time. We now know that. We might nominate you for some filibustering in the future, but great recap. I don't have too much to add. Only thing I would say is that, I think this decision is going to it's going to be talked about for a while because it almost is like if they're saying that they're not going to punish for athletes in the future, right? Then what they're really saying is that, they're more so asking teams, what do you have to be afraid of? Right? Because the postseason ban is the only thing fans in college football, administrators in college football, players in college football have ever really been afraid of with the NCAA outside of a death penalty, right? So big picture, that certainly is going to be talked about. Obviously, Michigan's response to this is more harsh than I think a lot of us expected with the immediate decision to appeal. I say immediate, 5 hours, whatever. Same day decision to appeal certainly changes the tenor around this conversation and it keeps it in the air for 8 months, a year, who knows how long. So that's going to be a story that we're going to keep talking about. So lots more to talk about here, but we did want to get to you guys with something on your podcast feeds before the weekend.
I was so ready to have a bourbon and just be done with the saga, one way or the other. It did not, I think we were all ready to just celebrate and cheers that at least it's over and at least we can move on no matter how you feel about it. I think everybody is sick of talking about this and thinking about it and hearing about it. But as you said, the show will go on and this will continue. I think we touched on all the major talking points. And I think it is important to just reiterate one more time. Michigan is the 2023 national champion. That was not really ever in question. And for the record, I was there that year. Every single game, they were the best team in college football. I just want to make that perfectly clear. But the question is, you just don't know how much they were helped by other signs. But I think the feather in their cap or their best defense is that October 17th of that season, they were like 8-0, 9-0 going into Michigan State. Stallions is found out. MSU is warned, and then they just rip off the most impressive stretch of their season. They hammer MSU. They beat top 10 Penn State on the road. They beat Ohio State, who I believe was also undefeated that season, at home to go to the Big Ten title. They win the Big Ten title, beat Bama in the Rose Bowl, then beat Washington in the national championship. All with no signs, no nothing, just straight up, just good old fashioned playing football. How about that? This was an elite team, an elite roster, an elite run, but you can't get past the fact that one NCAA, or some people can't, I would understand if you could not get past the fact, that one NCAA investigation, which was recruiting sanctions, sort of leads into another, which is sign stealing. And before that and after that, Harbaugh had 6 seasons in Ann Arbor. He lost 3 games or more every year. The first game after, in 2024, they lose 5 games. And then in this 3-year run where everything overlaps, they lost 3 games total. Just putting the math together, it seems to have affected things. But again, you can't prove it. And if you can't prove it, there's nothing to do. And all the evidence is at the bottom of the pond. So until Connor Stallions is maybe 85 and writing his memoir and finally comes out with everything in 2071 or whatever that might be, this is where we're left. So I'm going to leave it there. Andrew, final thought.
Is this now known as Pondgate? Is that what we're calling it now? That all the stuff's at the bottom of the pond?
We have a former boss who thinks it's very lazy to turn any scandal into X word gate, right? Sign gate or recruiting gate, pond gate. So we're above that. We're above that here.
It is a funny, ironic. I like the irony of it, but that's okay. Well, I think you're probably right.
Whatever you want to call it, we'll leave that to you. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Hail Yes. Thanks to Andrew, who has been working feverishly all day long. I like to think I was pretty busy today. This dude was even busier than me. I don't envy that. Same with our other editors who've all been great and working around the clock the last 24 hours since we found out this was happening. Thanks to Robin Chan, our audio engineer, who is in the background here, who Andrew always gives very polite and well-deserved shout outs to. He's fantastic. He's the reason this is going to get in your feeds pretty quickly here. And then thanks to our boss, Bill Bradley, our sports editor, and then our editor-in-chief of the paper, Nicole Avery Nichols. So that's who makes this happen. Check in, tune into freep.com. We've got wall-to-wall coverage of this, some great columns up. Mitch Album will be weighing in shortly. So lots to digest, lots to read, and you can get it all on freep.com. We'll be back next week. Thanks for listening.